We take a look at the offensive linemen and look at some of the stuff, good and bad, that's going on right now in the transfer portal. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, I'm Stephen Willis, a former staff member at Ole Miss and a 10-year veteran in the national media with Yahoo Sports. Thanks for watching. Hope everybody's having a fantastic Tuesday morning. Today on the show, we'll tell you what Ole Miss is doing on the offensive line in the transfer portal right now. And Ulysses Bentley is back officially, and some stuff that might be deemed a little bit negative is potentially happening in the portal as well. We'll talk all about that. As I mentioned, I'm Stephen Willis, and this is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're free and available on all the podcast apps and YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen every day, and a special hello to the everydayers that make the show what it is. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, the number one question that I'm getting right now, and everybody is asking, they go into my Twitter DMs and all that, and they're like, what are we going to be doing on the offensive line? We need offensive line. And there's people almost panicking at what Ole Miss's offensive line was off of the team that won 11 games, by the way. But we digress. They want to know what's going on the offensive line. And we have seen that Ole Miss has signed Daequan Scott, the utility man, Swiss Army knife, tackle, guard, center, can play all the positions on the offensive line. He's been signed. He's a road grader. And, looking at the offensive lineman that Ole Miss is looking at, they have a type. There's a definite body type. They're all within 6'5" and 6'7". They're all about 350 pounds. They all have played extensively. They definitely have a type on the offensive line. And whenever you run RPOs like Ole Miss runs RPOs, that is the situation that everybody needs to keep in mind. So what is next? Who is the next commitment? What are we doing on the offensive line? That is the question. Like I said, I've heard from everybody. And I think the next commitment, whenever it comes out, will be Diego Pounds. And that might be the greatest name for an offensive lineman I've ever heard. Just fantastic. Diego Pounds. And if you look on Twitter, there's been various not veiled things that he has committed. He's played tackle at North Carolina, protecting Drake May's blind side. Good offensive lineman. He's about 6'6", 340, 350, and is a really interesting deal. And this is one of three players that kind of Ole Miss is in on right now. And everybody's going to say, why isn't Ole Miss on interior offensive linemen? Why are they doing all these tackles? And I think the situation is they're comfortable moving players down if they're needed to move down. They figure if somebody can play tackle and they've played at a high level, they have the feet and the mobility good enough to play down in the interior. But also, you don't want a situation like what happened at Georgia this year to happen again. I mean, you lose your starting at that point left tackle. Your right tackle was hurt going into the game, and all of a sudden you had to mix and match and all of that stuff, and it looked a lot worse than it was. Ole Miss if they add Diego Pounds, that will be a major, major cog in their offensive line. Is the direct replacement for Victor Kern. If you look at as Daequan Scott is a direct replacement for Quincy McGee, they have essentially gotten the line back to the level it was at the end of the season. There's a couple other names that Ole Miss are recruiting as well. And Lane Kiffin tweeted this out, just a picture of a yoga mat whenever he was on vacation in the Bahamas, and just said 6'6", 350 sharp. Everybody is trying to national treasure this and put together information about what or who it might be. the reality is with Ole Miss's offensive line, you can't necessarily tell who it is. It could easily be Diego Pounds. It could be Lance Hurd. It could be Gerald Mincey. Those three players are the three players on the offensive line that Ole Miss is recruiting. And Gerald Mincey is due to visit, I think, starting Thursday per Zach Berry. You have a situation where Diego Pounds has already visited, and we're kind of on commitment watch for him as we speak. And then you have Lance Hurd, who is really tight with Pete Golding, as you can imagine. Pete was his recruiter trying to get him to Alabama, and he ended up going to LSU because Louisiana kids generally go to LSU. But now Ole Miss has a real shot to get Lance Hurd as well because of that. And he visiting Oklahoma, he's visiting Tennessee, and everybody's like, well, did Ole Miss cool on Lance Hurd? No, I just think it's a situation to where Ole Miss is always going to get a visit. Pete Golding was always going to get a visit. But he just wasn't around in that particular moment. Why waste time until Pete Golding gets back where he needs to be? So you have a situation with those three offensive linemen. And the question becomes, will Ole Miss take all three? I mean, if Ole Miss can take all three, yeah, I think they probably would, because they can serve a purpose of a Swiss Army knife a little bit with players that are built well enough to play guard, have feet good enough to play tackle. And there's even a couple of players here that snap the football. So you can build depth all along your offensive lineman with just these three players. And then you add Jerquan Scott, and you've got a pretty healthy roster. And when you look at players that are coming back, we haven't heard anything from Jeremy James, but we kind of assume that he's going to be back. You know, Micah Pettis is back. That's been announced. Jaden Williams back. That's been announced. Caleb Warren back. Eli Acker, I think, is back on this team as well. So this offensive line has a chance to be 7, 8, 9 deep going into next year, which is interesting because this team has worked at building cohesion. We'll just put it at that. Cohesion during the first 4 years of Lane Kiffin. Will this team be able to depth-wise go at a higher level than they have in recent years if they get all three? But I think there's a good chance that somebody like Diego Pounds could be the next player to pop. You know, you have Gerald Mincey from Tennessee. I believe he's visiting on Thursday. I think that's his name. I could be having a brain tumor type moment. And you have Lance Hurd, who we are all waiting to see exactly how this plays out. This is a situation where as soon as Lance Hurd did not go to the ReliaQuest Bowl, at that point, I started getting LSU DMs and let me know to keep an eye out for this kid because there's a good chance he can end up at Ole Miss. So you take that, you take all the other smoke that's going on, and you're going to give that player a little bit more leeway than otherwise. So those are three offensive linemen that could be very, very key pieces as Ole Miss looks to rebuild its running back room and challenge towards a college football playoff spot in 2024. Really, really interesting stuff indeed. Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen of the day. We are just getting started. While the portal focuses on running back in the offensive line, a DB could be about to get called up by Ole Miss. We'll tell you about that in just a second. But right now, I do want to let you know, I know we come here to sports to escape some of the crazy realities of real life, but can we just talk a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. It's kind of scary stuff. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if Becky and my wife got sick and there was no way to do anything about it because of some kind of a supply chain issue that prevents her from getting life-saving medication. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, and among or others. This stuff can happen to anybody. So visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important than be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national news that cover every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, so we talked about the offensive line and three names that Ole Miss fans probably need to pay attention to in the transfer portal right now. I do want to talk about a player now that is kind of off the beaten path. We've talked about Power 5 type players and what they can do, but we all know how I feel about the G5 players that get kind of called up and they have a chance to really prove themselves, like the John Saunders of the world, the Isaac Ukwus, those players. It will be really interesting to see how they go. And South Alabama has a player that will be visiting Ole Miss this weekend named Yam Banks. He's from Ridgeland, Mississippi. He's kind of a local Mississippi kid. He's played safety. And you look at 2021, he had 49 tackles. 2022, 50 tackles. 2023, 43 tackles. But also, if you look at what he did in the 22 season, he also had 6 picks and 11 passes defended. You're talking about a safety that plays really well on the back end. Now, I don't know what caused everything to drop down a little bit this year. Maybe he just wasn't being targeted enough, and maybe they were game planning around Yam Banks in the Sun Belt. But you have a situation where this safety is what he's listed as. He's 6'1", 210 pounds, decent size, safety from the South Alabama Jaguars. Now, this is a pretty big deal. I'm really rooting for this kid. They're bringing him on a visit, so that means everybody needs to take him seriously. And we're going to talk in a little bit about some stuff that might be going the other way on these visits, but Ole Miss is going to continue to recruit kids all the way until the moment they enroll in school, and other schools are going to do the same thing. So expect visits to happen, honestly, this weekend, next weekend, and the weekend after. The next 3 weekends, I think. Let me double check on that real quick. Yes, the next 3 weekends, expect them to be fairly filled with official visits. And Yam Banks is one of those players that's going to take those spots and on official visits. Now, you also have Gerald Mincey, the offensive tackle from Tennessee, is going to be visiting. And if you look at this player as well, we're going to talk about that in the next segment potentially. But he's a tight end out of Virginia Tech. His name is Daequan Wright. Ole Miss tried to bring him in on the week of December the 14th, before the holiday break. So that shows you what Ole Miss thinks about it. And for whatever reason, the visit fell through. So Ole Miss moved on to other targets, and we all saw that Ole Miss tried to recruit a little bit Cole Rush, but they canceled that visit, or that visit got canceled, and he went to Illinois. However it happens, that doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is he didn't show up on campus. And now Daequan Wright, all of a sudden, he's back in the issue. Zach Berry reported Virginia Tech tight end Daequan Wright tells Ole Miss Spirit he'll be at Ole Miss Friday on an official visit. This uber athletic 4-star prospect had 47 receptions for 574 yards in 2 seasons with the Hokies. That tells you he'll have 2 years at Ole Miss as well. Really interesting stuff. There's going to be players popping in all the time. And we're going to tell you something coming up. Like I said, there's some negative that's happening. There's some positives that's happened. We're kind of going to kind of get to the rumors phase of the program, looking at what can happen on down the road. But some official visits coming in here. There's other players that are going to come in. I talked to somebody today who would know exactly what's going on, that told me to keep an eye on the visits this weekend. So I'm going to do that. the players that everybody Ole Miss fans probably need to keep an eye on right now, definitely Diego Pounds, as we are potentially on commitment watch for Diego Pounds. I think Ole Miss needs to keep an eye on Lance Hurd, and I think Ole Miss needs to keep an eye on Gerald Mincey. That's the offensive lineman. Now, if you look at these other players, Yam Banks, a great name. I mean, him and Diego Pounds, just fantastic. It's like all name weekends happening in Oxford, Mississippi. Keep an eye on those players. Keep an eye on Daequan Wright. I think he has the athleticism and everything to come in behind Kedrick Reecano. Ole Miss can potentially run. You know how much I love 12 personnel. I spent a year before last season talking about the benefits of what 12 personnel can happen, and then you had players get hurt all over the place, and they couldn't use it. With Kedrick Reecano and Daequan Wright and Hudson Wolf, I think there's a chance that Ole Miss is going to use some 12 personnel depending on the opponent next season. So these official visits coming in, it's very early in the process, but definitely keep an eye on Yam Banks. My Twitter, as soon as he announced that he was visiting Ole Miss, David Schultz from Locked On Sunbelt popped on my Twitter timeline and talked about how awesome of a football player this guy was. So I'm very excited about that. But he's from Ridgeland, Mississippi. He's about 6'1", 210 pounds. He's a safety, and you'll be able to see exactly what's going on there. Now, we talk about that. There's still more to come on Locked On Ole Miss. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network every day. Official visits are happening. We talk about some good and some bad transfer portal rumors right after this. But first, the NFL regular season is wrapping up, and there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is easy to use, and there's so many different ways that you can win. Like they have same game parlays, or you can go to the Explore tab and find different unique bets or something like that, or go to the Parlay Hub and go like design your own parlay. And it's also the best way to find the popular parlays at the moment, and many, many, many more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet and layup. FanDuel, it's an official partner of the NFL. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen of the day, and shout out to the everydayers. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. Be part of history. So we talked about some offensive linemen that Ole Miss is really going to be in on over the next week or so. And we talked about some other players that are going to be officialing this weekend as well. Let's talk about some rumors, just some good old-fashioned rumors in this section. And there's a couple of topics that I want to talk about after the conversations that I had today with people. First of all, Ole Miss needs to be aware, and they are. Ole Miss knows what's going on, that Louisville is trying really hard to get Tyler Barron and Tamarion McDonald and all those guys to flip. It's a war. It's going to be a fight until Ole Miss gets them on campus. Louisville is going to do what they can to sign those players. Okay? Nothing weird. Nothing's going on nefarious. It's just going to be a fight. And Louisville has done the part at the beginning of signing the third Tennessee player in the transfer portal in Wesley Walker, or he committed him. And they're going to use Wesley Walker to try and get towards Tamarion McDonald, who's going to try and get towards Tyler Banks. And that is something that Ole Miss should watch for over the next couple of weeks. Now, for whatever reason, Ole Miss has done pretty well at these type events in the recent past. So these head-to-head competitions, at the end of the day, we all remember what happened with Nereel White. Ole Miss has done fairly well in these type situations. So I don't think anybody needs to go sky is falling. I just think everybody needs to be aware that that seems to be where the commitment fight is for Ole Miss football in the transfer portal. Now, thank goodness it didn't with Walter Nolan, and thank goodness it didn't with Princely and Monmielen or Chris or Pupal or those guys. But this is something where Louisville is trying. They figured out that they can make their defense just a little bit better by going and getting this triangle of Tennessee football players and 2 secondary pieces and Tyler Barron. So Ole Miss is going to have to fight that off. It might be a situation to where you see Wesley Walker get offered by Ole Miss. This could be a ploy to get him an Ole Miss offer. Maybe he doesn't have one at the moment. So we'll see exactly how that goes. But I think everybody needs to be aware that this is happening. And in transfer portal, everybody can make commitments. It doesn't matter until you enroll and get in school. Once school starts and you go to the first class or the first team meeting, then your clock at that institution starts. Until that, there's nothing to sign. It's a waiting list. It's a good faith list. And teams are going to recruit kids all the way through until the very end, because you would be insane not to do that. But the 2 players that Ole Miss have commitments from that people probably need to watch is Tamarion McDonald and Tyler Barron currently as well. Now, the good news, okay? Talk to somebody fairly high up that would know exactly what he's saying, that would have knowledge of what's going on. And he mentioned that Ole Miss needs to probably watch the visits over the next weekend or two at the running back position. If there's any players coming onto campus that are running backs. Now, it might be a situation where Ole Miss is trying to keep this under wraps, and we don't know what's going to happen. So him saying that means I'm going to pay attention to everybody that's coming on and doing a visit to Ole Miss that plays the running back position. Now, yesterday we had the video with Roydell Williams, Logan Diggs, and Jace McClellan as the 3. But the SEC window, we'll find out by now. You will have known all of the names that are available within the SEC at the running back position. Now, that doesn't necessarily matter because you can still do conference to conference. It's an SEC rule. But we'll see if any additional players from the SEC ends up popping in the transfer portal as the window comes to a close. Surely interesting, really interesting stuff. And also, after the national championship game, you'll have 5 days for Washington and Michigan players again to enter the transfer portal. And all of those are open season, fair game as well to go in and transfer and play immediately as well. So we'll see exactly how that goes. Pretty fired up about it. But 2 to 3 running backs on official visit potentially this weekend. Now, no names were given, and that's fine. No specifics were given, but it feels like this doesn't feel like it was the surprise that we thought it was, if that makes sense. This doesn't feel like a total surprise. And we'll see exactly how Ole Miss goes. Now, if you look at the other side of it, ask the person point blank about running back recruiting. And he talked about Ulysses Bentley, and who just officially announced that he was coming back. We'll talk about that in just a second. But he talked about those 3 names. You know what he didn't say? Q was not mentioned one time. Not once. Wasn't even brought up as something that Ole Miss could do in the running back room. So based off of that, I'm going to file that rumor away a little bit differently as well. Ulysses Bentley officially announcing he's coming back is a massive, massive step for Ole Miss football. Massive, huge. I don't think people realize. Now, everybody's going to say, well, he can't tote the rock 278 times. No, he can't. But you know what he can do? He can make the offense more explosive when he's in there. He can play a little bit more times. Instead of 97 carries or whatever he got, it's going to be around 150. And you're going to have a situation with Ole Miss offensively to where you have that Snoop Connor, Jerry and Ely, and Henry Parrish type role. And Ole Miss has the Henry Parrish and the Jerry and Ely on campus right now. So Ole Miss is looking for their Snoop Connor. And those players that might be visiting in the weekend at the running back position, who we have to see if any names pop up there. I was told to keep an eye on it. We'll see exactly how that goes and if it materializes. From my conversation, it doesn't sound like anybody was caught off guard. It doesn't sound like they're worried. And it doesn't sound like there's any doubts about what they have already in the room. They really like Kedrick Reecano. I don't think anybody should think anything differently about that. And we all know Ulysses Bentley, he's coming back to kind of, he's going to come back with the mindset of being the dude. We'll see which players are in the portal and how Ole Miss is recruiting this until February 2nd or so. We'll keep an eye on what's going on and running backs that might be visiting because, you know, it might be different because you're not looking for the bell cow anymore. You're not. You're looking for somebody good that can fill a role and as part of that room, like I said, can get you 2,600 yards and 29 touchdowns. That is the goal moving forward with this running back room. And there's 2 or 3 players you can do that with, honestly. So we'll see exactly how that goes as well. So pay attention to the visits this weekend. Ulysses Bentley is officially back. So 2 of the main pieces in Ole Miss's running back room is there. Ole Miss probably needs 1 more, maybe 2. And Louisville is going to be going after Tyler Beering and Tamarion McDonald really hard. They just signed or just committed Wesley Walker, and they're trying to put together like a Tennessee triumvirate in the transfer portal as well. So should be pretty good. I do want to say thanks to everybody for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast their first listen every day. Every day as we continue to turn our attention to the portal and SEC hoops. Will Ole Miss and Chris Beard rebound following a bad night in Tennessee? For your second listen, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows that cover every single league. For your second listen, go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 stream channel. For those of you on YouTube, we'll send you there right now. Hotty toddy, everyone.